Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Shalom, good evening, goedenavond. Welcome to another episode of Liberty and Friends here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. My name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. Ho! Has it not been a while since you and I have spoken? Goodness me, I can attribute a lot of that to a bit of a turbulent period in my personal life, which has even necessitated me moving back to my home township of Mlazi, just outside Durban. So this broadcast of the BDL show Liberty and Friends is coming to you for the very first time in Mlazi, Durban. Shout out to all my fellow Umlazi folks who actually, I've learned quite a few who watch my content. So shout out to you guys, and of course, shout out to you guys who are just regular fans of the show. You know what to do. A good reminder, because it has been a while. If you like what you're doing, if you like what I'm doing here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show, you can support my work and this channel with a contribution every month of as little as $50 or $2. And if you can't afford that, because I know this economy is it's rather tough times at the moment. Trust me, you don't have to ask me about that. All you do, and the price of admission is a like. Hit that like button whether you're watching on Twitter, Facebook, or on YouTube. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. As always, on the show, we feature a revolving panel of voices, liberty-minded voices, whether they are conservatives, classical liberals, libertarians, or even anarchists who we've had on the show before. These are the sort of voices you often don't hear on mainstream media. So we bring them on Liberty and Friends for them to analyze the news week that was. That's what we do here on Liberty and Friends. I can see in my control panel here, we have a full house. So perhaps let me get straight into it. The first voice, someone who is new to the channel. It's the very first time that he's been on the show. This chap is, man oh man, is he not going to introduce a topic tonight which will form the mainstay of what we're going to talk about, and it's going to involve you, the fellow South African, the faith, flag, family, and freedom type South African. A lot of you keep asking me, what do we do? What do we do, Big Daddy? We're seeing our quality of life dissipate around me as the economy lags, the politicians get stronger and stronger and stifle and strangle us. And a lot of you people often ask me, what do we do, BDL, aside from the groundwork that I do on the streets and which I encourage you to do to spread these sort of liberty ideas. So I thought to myself, heck, let me bring this chap on. He's from the organization, the trade union Solidariteit, as ons sê in Afrikaans, maar in Engels, this Solidarity. And I'm talking, of course, about Connie Mulder. Let me bring him on screen. There he is. Connie Mulder, how are you doing, brother?
Good evening, Sihle. It's a nice evening. It's quite warm and it's becoming spring, so quite well, I suppose.
Absolutely. Speaking about warm, I am sweating like a whore in church, as the expression goes here in Durban. It is a hot Durban evening. It's rather balmy. I'm not quite used to the humidity once again. But Connie, good to have you on the show. Just give me a short moment here. Let me just put my phone on a do not disturb function. There we go. The next chap who I want to bring on is the host of the Nocturnal Unwrap podcast. That's a very libertarian, classically liberal-voiced young man. I'm talking, of course, about Phila Shongwe. There he is. Phila, good evening. Welcome to LNF.
Good evening, Sihle. Good evening to the viewers as well. It's great to be back, man.
Hey, tada. Good to have you on the show. And then I must prime this one, because I'm bringing on the trio from the Manpatria podcast. Please, 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 whatever you do, after you watch this, go over to Manpatria podcast, like, share their content, because I'm talking, of course, about the head honcho of the trio, Dumo Denga. There he is, Dumo. Good evening. Welcome to LNF.
Hi, Sihle. Thanks for the introduction, and I'm really looking forward tonight.
Excellento, excellento. Not far behind him, of course, is a chap who is a regular voice on here and who's a firm favorite amongst you folks. I'm talking, of course, about Koketso Resane. There he is, Koketso. Good evening.
Good evening to you, good evening to everyone, and good evening to everyone who's actually paying attention to us instead of the president. So yeah,
Shout out to those
pats on our
people indeed,
backs.
man. And I'm seeing the numbers trickling in slowly. It probably will improve after the president in the president of the country, Freudian slips, is done waffling away, likely about dropping the lockdown levels, but we'll cover that a bit later, and we'll ask people to give us some snippets and updates in the comments. Last but not least, who makes up that trio, of course, at the Manpatria podcast? I'm talking, of course, about the legal eagle in the house, Nzuzo Khati. Nzuzo, good evening. Welcome to LMF.
Evening, Sihle, and evening to the guests as well. What's up, guys? Koketso and Dumo. I'm happy to be here, and what's up to all the listeners, subscribers. Thank you for watching while the president is on. Yeah, let's have a great show.
Absolutely, welcome to the show. Goodness me, we're going to get straight into it, perhaps, because, as you guys rightly said, the president is waffling away right now, and we will get to that. And I encourage folks in the comments just to give us snippets of what he is saying. I'll flight those on screen, and then, of course, we will, as the panel, chew on that, because I think it is marginally important to discuss the ongoing COVID grift, which is characterized, of course, why I call it a COVID grift, because it does upset quite a few of you guys. But why I call it a COVID grift is that, this virus has been really profitable for certain politicians and even those in the private sector who are grifting off of it and ignoring logical steps that are perhaps required to fight this virus. So no, on this show, we're not denialists of COVID-19, but we definitely are, or at least on my front, let me speak for myself, firmly opposed to these ongoing lockdowns, which are an assault on your life, your liberty, and your property rights. But we'll get into that in relation to the president's comments a bit later. Tonight on Liberty and Friends, we're going to look at this week as it has been and the sort of headlines that have dominated. Let me begin, perhaps, fellas, on the age-old favorite. I'm talking, of course, about the parastatal named Eskom, which has the monopoly over the power or electricity production in this country. Has it not been a clown world week for Eskom? Indeed, a rather clown world year, if not the last 5 years, have been absolutely clownish. What am I talking about this week? Their Kendal Power Station. This is one of the power stations that produces as much as 2,000 megawatts cumulatively. Saw effectively an explosion and a fire develop, and it knocked one of their generators out, tripping another three, effectively rendering the facility shut down, effectively, and it still is for a moment. But here's why this matters. We already are in a situation where the single provider of electricity is struggling to provide electricity, and now we have just under 2,000 megawatts off the grid. I don't know if they've managed to get the other 3 units up, but that's irrelevant for a moment. I want to set up the question. Here's why it bugged me, and the story was one that I had to bring up to you guys as the panel. Just a few months ago, in fact, Medupi, their newest power station, literally exploded which saw massive damage to the facility. The explosion itself was heard and felt within a 15-kilometer radius. There's a lot of people who don't know this. So this is a massive, massive problem where the single provider of something in this country is literally failing at that and failing spectacularly. Dumo.
Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to speak, right? Sorry about that.
Yeah, jump in, man.
Okay, sorry, guys. My apologies. I was just taken off guard there. But yeah, thanks for that, Sihle. All right, so given the Eskom story, remember they said Medupi was finished, and then now there's an explosion, and now we have this. I mean, this is a topic that I'm really passionate about. Also another aspect of it is that electricity prices are going up every year, yet we don't see the Competition Commission going to Eskom and investigating that industry and saying, hey, we need more players in the market to provide. The reality is that we just need more supply of electricity in the market, whether it be nuclear, whether it be renewable energy and so forth. We just need to take advantage of that, allow more players into the market, provide the electricity. Also, at the same time, Eskom cannot be the only a company that's allowed to sell electricity to private individuals and also municipalities as well. Give other private players a chance. That'll at least assist the load that's on Eskom. And lastly, I think what we also need to take into consideration is that when you have more of a supply of electricity in the market, when things like the incidents at Kendal Power Station occur, and things like that occur, at least there will be other supply from other players who can assist with providing the shortfall of electricity. And if we have that, the Kendal Power Station situation wouldn't have been as bad as it is now. But because now it's only Eskom that's providing electricity, when that power station goes down, it becomes a mess. You got load shedding, outage schedules, everything like that, which is not sustainable. So let's get more players into the market, let them compete, let the best provider win, and you'll see. I mean, people will have better options and we will be in a much better place.
Absolutely. And Connie, I'm going to come to you for a moment because there is a conversation to be had here. And let me just quickly read from this particular article. It says, this is from the ENCA business page on this particular issue. Eskom, I quote, is investigating the cause of the fire that broke out at the Kendal station in Mpumalanga. The incident itself resulted, as I mentioned at the beginning, in one unit being damaged, causing the two others to trip as well. The power utility says all of its staff is accounted for and there are no injuries. But the key line I read here is the first one, which is that Eskom is investigating the cause of this particular fire. Now, here's the thing, Connie. We have a situation where there've been other incidents that have literally destroyed the infrastructure of Eskom. And we often hear the spin, which is, don't worry, they'll effectively tell us we're on top of it, we're investigating. But we never hear the outcomes of these investigations, because surely those are the sort of investigations that will let us know whether a lot of this is happening because of incompetence, poor management, or, even aging infrastructure, or maybe all of the three.
Sihle, as a unionist, obviously, first and foremost, it's wonderful that no one got injured. That could have been a really bad situation, and we don't want to lose somebody to that. Unfortunately, this incident is not unique, and that we've seen this happen several times. Now, we have, I think, almost 6,000 members who work at Eskom, and the stories they tell you is absolutely horror stories about just maintenance not being done. For 10 years plus. A lot of these stations have not been maintained at all. Our members stayed when there are strikes and stuff like that. They actually slept in the power stations to keep the lights on, whilst being threatened with violence if they do their job. And it's quite frustrating from their perspective. We've heard several stories when just plain you're not being supported. Luckily, it seems that it's starting to change a bit. But the culture of not being accountable is one that has festered in Eskom completely, and that is something that's desperately trying to change, at least. From my perspective, somebody should, quite frankly, you should be fired if you blow up a power station. It means you did something wrong and you endangered lives, and more importantly, this is having a massive knock-on effect on the rest of the economy. But as we rightly point out, they shouldn't be in this situation. We're extremely frustrated. We've been lobbying Minister Mantashi for years to say, but open up private generation. Let's go that way. Right. Our members are more than happy to have other companies compete for their skills, to have what happened practically. I don't know if you remember, Sihle, we gave, I think it's Minister Gordon, about 2 to 3 years back, we gave him a list of engineers because they started importing engineers. So we gave him a list of 1,500 retired engineers. Each one of them indicated we are more than willing to come and to help fix the power stations. Several of them had like 20 years, 30 years experience. They never heard back at all. And then what happened is those guys went and fixed the Philippines power problem, and now they're fixing Abu Dhabi's power problem. And that's the absurdity. Is we've got the skills, we've got people who are willing to work and to fix South Africa's power problems, and we're just adamant on not using them. And from what we can tell, the only reason was it's just plain vested interest in who gets the contracts. That's right. That's massively worrying, especially when you've got a monopoly. I see one of your listeners asked why is Eskom a monopoly? At the very start,
that's a comment by Shipalana.
Yeah, at the very start of power generation, quite frankly, the capital needed to build a power station was only really available to government. So a lot of governments started out with monopoly power generation. South Africa, however, stuck to it for 20 years after the rest of the world started moving along with legislation, enforcing, having an enforced monopoly, which started as a natural monopoly, but eventually now with technology, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's why we're actually quite excited that the private generation cap has been lifted, but as always, the ANC is just taking too long. The quicker we can get to a Vietnam sort of situation, and I don't think not a lot of people know this, but Vietnam had the same issues, massive problems with power generation. And they fixed it almost overnight by just saying everyone who wants to can generate power and add it to the grid, we'll try and organize it. And suddenly it became profitable to put solar panels up because if you're on holiday, then you're getting money from your solar panels and you're providing the country with something. We've, according to all indications, we've got more than enough small generation capacity already to solve load shedding. For some reason, we're just refusing to use it. And that's the frustrating part. The reason the infrastructure explodes, however, Sihle, is most of these stations should have been decommissioned 10 to 15 years ago. And they weren't. They're being run on way past the time that they should be. They're not efficient at all, efficient anymore. And then with Medupi, it's just there were a couple of serious design problems, but it got pushed through for some weird reason that now needs to be redone. And we're just really sort of angry at you're putting workers' lives in danger here, you're putting contractors' lives in danger, and you're threatening the country with blackouts.
Absolutely.
This is just stupid. We should be moving to more power generations, having each municipality buy from 3 or 4 suppliers and then deciding who you want to supply your power. There's no reason we can't do that. We're already doing that with internet and other services. It doesn't make any sense.
And let me hop in there because, I mean, that last point in particular is a critically important one insofar as it speaks to that question by Ushipelana that they asked. But before I get into that, shout out to you, Shahid Davids, for the 200 Rand super chat. I appreciate it. Homie says it must go to admin. This is exactly what it will do. Thank you very much, brother. A little bit of diesel in the tank. There's an interesting development here where, and we're all sort of skirting saying this openly, which is the reason why South Africa continues to endure rolling blackouts. I don't use the word load shedding because I think it's a nice little cover for incompetence, but the reason why we're experiencing rolling blackouts is ideology and politicians who are insistent on running a business that they have no clue how to run. Let me be precise and specific, and Connie and Dumo have already covered a lot of these angles. Koketso, I'll come to you after this. You have a situation where there is an insistence that nothing happens until some politician or bureaucrat, nothing happens unless some politician or bureaucrat says it happened. So the market then continues to scream for the service, it demands that service, but it never happens because a politician feels an almost power trip, if you will, on it only happens until I say it does. Now, Koketso, as you think about that particular point, bring in this particular, the angle Connie raised, which is actually, look at Vietnam. Vietnam went the other route. It used the market, the very market that I'm speaking of, where if there's a realization by an entrepreneur, whether big or small, that there is demand for something, the same demand that I speak of here in South Africa that we have, let the market meet that demand in innovative ways.
Yeah, it's exactly that. So probably the first issue I'd like to bring to our attention, and we've mentioned this a few times before already, is that if you look at how the political framework is structured, by design, of course, by the ruling party and their associates, you have to ask yourself, who's our energy minister, who's our mining minister, who's our trade minister, who's in charge of treasury, etc. And a lot of the time, these are actually people who are grossly incompetent. They have no demonstrable skill in the portfolio that they are given. You have someone who's sitting in the highest office possible, that is that of a ministerial position. Take someone like Manpatria, for example. He comes off into the mining space, having come off the back of being ANC Secretary General. You know, what does he actually bring to the mining portfolio? I'd hate to be a mining boss and then having to appease someone who, you know, for lack of a better term, hasn't actually demonstrated any key knowledge in that portfolio. And it's the same thing really with energy, where the people in charge at a governmental level don't typically, they don't know what they're doing, or there's no evidence to actually show us that they know what they're doing. And that's why they're not actually privy to taking the advice of actual experts, retired or not. And we're not even getting into the race debate at this point in time yet. So you cannot actually offer an effective consultative service to someone who isn't willing to actually follow through on your key advice. But guess who is? Typically someone like a Vietnam who realizes the scale of the problem and wants to get out of the rut they are in. Now, it's interesting that Connie mentioned Vietnam. The difference between us and them, you could almost say almost the entirety of the Far East here, is that of Southeast Asia. I mean, they've gone through wars. They've gone through actual wars. Life hasn't exactly been easy there since about the 1930s or so, up until the 21st century. So life hasn't really been easy there. And the fact that they can pull themselves out of it just shows that there's something that they're doing that typically we're not. I know that we've drawn comparisons between South Africa and Singapore a lot, but also Vietnam is a good place to actually have a look at. We're not even looking at the Middle East at this point, but yeah, there's something that they're doing that we're not. And we've seen now from what Connie just told us that it really just comes down to having the ability to self-reflect as a state and realize that, right, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, this is where I fall short, and bring in the expertise from anywhere in the world who will actually come and help you solve that problem. Where we're sitting as South Africans, we are actually bleeding talent to entire nation states and cities who realize the value of South African engineers, of South African expertise. We really should be taking advantage of that. But again, this conversation can only really start when the people right at the top are willing to actually look in the mirror and say, right, we don't know what we're doing here, or we're not as competent as we'd like to believe. So let's actually get some people who are. And unfortunately, this quickly turns into a race thing in our perspective. No one at government wants to admit that, probably to take things to a better place, we might just need to actually talk to the guys who built these bridges, the guys who built these power stations, the guys who actually built out a lot of the infrastructure that we inherited as a new nation in 1994 going forward. You are on mute.
Sorry about that. And I was just saying, Phila, let me come to you and then Nzuzo as we just wrap up this point. We must move on. Connie rightly raised the issue of the effects on workers, for instance. When you're thrust into an environment like this one, which is incredibly dangerous. I mean, imagine working in a place where something that you oversee on a day-to-day basis can explode in a manner in which that explosion is felt and heard in a 15-kilometer radius, as was the case, by the way, in Nzuzo when that incident happened in that part of the world. But there's another forgotten person in this particular instance, which is the poorer South African who suffers a disproportionately higher cost of the incompetence of a state and a statist system that insists on holding on to power and holding on to decision-making at Eskom when the market is literally screaming, we can provide cheaper, more effective, decentralized, and available power if you just look to the freer market.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I did want to comment on the issue of the workers, but I think Connie, who is a trade unionist, I think he covered that quite well. But I do tend to get worried about the extent to which we speak about this issue of Eskom in silos. So it's either the ANC's nationalistic sort of approach to industry versus everybody else's nationalistic sort of take on this issue. And I think that's where the problem is. I think, insofar as we recognize, or in fact the ANC and all the nationalistic folks recognize that the idea of nationalizing Eskom runs against and undermines their very existence, only then do I think that we can, find our way out of the abyss in which we find ourselves in. But yes, no, absolutely. I think the idea of Eskom being a monopoly and the idea of poor people in particular having to pay more for a lackluster service is crying scandal that must be addressed. And I think, as I said earlier, I mean, we must stop looking at the issue in silos. We need to stop looking at it as a privatization versus nationalization kind of thing, because to the extent that we do that, the ANC will, of course, want to remain and want to keep in tabs with their nationalistic ideology. I think we need to recognize, and we need to make them realize and come to the table and recognize that actually the idea of nationalizing ESCOM, with the kind of consequences that it has, undermines the ANC's very existence as well. And it is only when they realize that, then do I think that we're going to be able to, as I said, claw our way out of the abyss in which we find ourselves. As I mentioned earlier, the high prices that are being paid by consumers are a direct result of ESCOM's stranglehold on the economy. And the extent that ESCOM, we're at ESCOM's absolute mercy under the current regime, and I think something must change. And unfortunately, we have to play by the peripherals of the Constitution, and I think that in some ways is an impediment to the way forward. I mean, when I look at Bitcoin, among other things, I look at the forced sort of competition that they bring to the monetary regime. And I think perhaps something of that nature that is unhinged and unconstrained by the peripherals of the Constitution needs to be brought to the table. And I think, it's only through a marketplace that we're going to be able to solve the issue. And I just don't quite understand why it's taken us this long. Because, I mean, you could look at it as an issue that impacts workers from an organization that's in an alliance with a massive, massive trade union. If they cared about workers, they would address it. But I think the more important issue is the issue of, customers and consumers, ordinary South Africans who are having to pay for this lackluster service. And I think if we are truly concerned about them, if we are truly concerned about the very people that put these people in power, then I think we need to we need to address the issue of ESCOM being a monopoly, and we need to recognize that not only are people having to pay more for electricity in South Africa, but that they're also subsidizing people who are occupying public spaces for personal gain. And I think when we recognize that, will be the extent to which we can escape this abyss in which we find ourselves.
Absolutely. And Nzuzo, let me come to you just to cap off this conversation, because I purposefully put it on screen, because another big factor that we haven't actually traversed here insofar as why we see a lot of the mess that we see, and perhaps why we see a resistance, as Koketso mentioned, from the powers that be, for them to look at those who used to run these facilities, those who built these facilities, say, guys, maybe we need you to work hand in hand with this new generation of engineers, is the policy of things like Black economic empowerment, which really, if we're to be brutally honest, if you look at the construction of Medupi and Kusile, for example, there are Black entrepreneurs who have through BEE who have become fantastically and really fabulously rich, even though the facility that they built is trash and is of no effective use to the broader public who happen to be Black. That is the tragic irony of this, is it not? Is that the policy like BEE actually creates a wider rift in real terms between the Black elite and the overwhelming Black poor in this country?
Yes, CK, just starting off with hopping on what Philani said, we need to punish them at the polls. I think that at the end of the day, these people need to understand that we've had enough. Society has had enough of the ANC and its policies and their inability to do anything and the incompetence, and we need to punish them at the polls. But if anyone wants to understand how PE is just so destructive to society like South Africa and how it hurts the productive society which South Africa can become, just read Anthea Jeffrey's book, PE Hurting or Helping. You'll just see how bad PE is, not only in the energy sector, but also in the education sector, which has been devastated by such a policy. But yeah, I don't think that it's in the interest to even remove BEE. You speak about the Black entrepreneurs, let's call them what they are, cadres, guys that are actually feeding the ANC through various contracts, which, Connie has also spoken about that. That's the reason why they can't even, that's the reason why they didn't want to hire those engineers that put their hand up to assist. It's because at the end of the day, these guys, when they get the contracts, they're able to funnel money through these contracts and actually push it through towards, the ANC itself. So it's of course, I don't even think that they even have the policy to the extent of what it does to society, but rather what it fills up their pockets, it makes them much more richer, And to be honest, if they are to remove this, I don't think they will actually, I think they'll also be poor. Because to be honest, there's nothing else that the ANC provides. There's no service which I can think of which ANC is good at and actually it will require them to be giving to us so that and for us to pay them. I don't think they're actually good at it. I think that it's best if South Africans actually take on the man, even in the private sector, even in the energy sector rather. And also, it just shows how much they're so incompetent to the point where, just a couple of months ago, Apostle announced that he was that they would allow people to generate up to 100 meg power. Yet they're still here to implement that policy. They're still here to implement such a policy that is of assistance to many people who don't have electricity across the country. But they still, Gwede Mantashe is sitting on his laurels. People are crying out for electricity. People are saying, I'll put my hand up, I'll fix ESCOM, let's do it together. But obviously, they don't really care because it's in their interest to keep on going like this, to keep on using PE, to keep on using policies that benefit them. And like I said, we need to punish them at the polls. That's the only way. That's the only way they can actually wake up. That's the only way they can actually do something, which I think they won't do because they in disarray anyway, the ANC. So, yeah, I think that that's the best way, just punish them at the polls.
As I was saying, speaking about punishment, I'm a punishment for timekeeping. It has just gone 8:30. We're 30 minutes into the Liberty and Friends, which is a 90-minute long format broadcast. Welcome to it. You are watching, of course, Dumo Denga, who is the host of the Manpatria podcast. Koketso Resane, who is a co-host on the same show. Nzuzo, Khati makes up the trio out in the Manpatria world. Phila, Shongwe, who is the host of the Nocturnal Unwrap podcast. Make sure you check that out, please, on all the formats that they're on. And of course, Connie Mulder, the lead researcher at the trade union Solidariteit, or Solidarity in English. Remember, hit that like button, please. The engagement is nowhere near where I want it to be. Let's keep that 50% engagement, please. So I want to see some more likes, please. Hit that like button. And as I always say, feed a kid in Africa. That's right. Hit that like button and make that happen. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. I want to move us on, fellas, to a topic just for us to get it out the way. Pardon me. Just for us to get it out the way. And that's, of course, President Ramaphosa. I don't know if he's still speaking, but he's gotten through the more substantive, meaty bits of what he was saying. And I did see a comment here from Graham McTaggart. Not that one. Just before that one, where he was effectively just giving us feedback on what is happening on the other side with the Commander-in-Chief of the country giving his speech on where the lockdown is going. Back to level 2, says Graham. The curfew, why we even have one is beyond me, but we'll get into that in a moment. It's now from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. Gatherings indoors limited to 250 or 50% of buildings' ordinary capacity. Outdoors. Pardon me. Sorry, guys. What is going on? Yikes. Pardon me. Outdoors, limited to 500 people. And of course, take your jab if you want to go back to normal, as we are often told by the political elites. Fellas, let's quickly traverse this one, because really, I said it at the very beginning of this broadcast. There's really not much to be gauged in this ongoing different levels of lockdown. Lockdown itself is trash. It does not work. Dumo.
Yes, this is a statement that I agree with, Sihle. I think what we've been seeing is that there's just been excuses for the government to keep having this lockdown. So at the beginning, it was, well, we need to stop the spread. Well, it was to ramp up the healthcare system. And they didn't ramp up the healthcare system. Now it was to stop the spread. And then now, when the hospital system became full, and then, I was saying, well, increase the supply of healthcare. It looks like they built some field hospitals, then they closed them down. And then they put us down to a much more strict level. And now the jabs are here. people are getting vaccinated, and I'm not here to say whether you should take the jab or not, but now it seems that the president wants to make our freedoms dependent on the vaccine, or let's say the jab rates, if you want to put it that way. And I think that's a very dangerous game that he's playing, because the moment he starts doing that, there's going to be unnecessary pressure being put on people to take the jab, and they won't be able to make decent risk assessments. So I think in the long run, this is going to be a very tough situation for us, because already we've seen that the lockdowns have caused a lot of economic damage. I mean, like, if you think about it, millions of people lost their jobs, a lot of businesses became defunct, and so forth, which is obviously not the best thing. So we need to understand that the lockdowns damage the economy, they damage livelihoods, and it's not fair that if the president has done so, to make our freedoms more dependent on how many people get the jab, which is not the right way to look at it. Rather, the damage that has been caused by the lockdown is enough evidence to show that, listen, we should not have the lockdown anyway. And also, they need to increase the supply of healthcare to help those that end up in the ICU units as well. But they haven't done that, and that's a problem. I mean, it's easy for them to exert their power on us, but then they also have the mandate for healthcare, but they don't want to do anything about that, which is crazy. But yeah, that's what I think.
And again, that's where it gets really interesting. Phila, let me come to you, because I think Dumo traversed nearly all the points in this, and I want to unpack the one in particular, which is the lack of trust that is with the public, and what a politician says. Dumo rightly says, for instance, that when this lockdown began, we were told, oh no, it's just to buy a bit of time to improve the quality of the public and, of course, the private healthcare system, because we anticipate larger numbers. So that's not been in debate or contestation. We always knew, insofar as what we were told, that COVID-19 would ramp up the number of people requiring care, possibly hospitalization, because it is a pandemic. We understood this. And unfortunately, I got dribbled by that first 2 weeks nonsense. And I also said, okay, sure, why not? Let me give up some of my freedoms, I foolishly said, for 2 weeks, because it's going to get the hospitals ready. But now we have a situation where the story changes, Phila, and people really are just not buying it anymore.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the price the government has to pay for just perpetually changing its leopard skin, if I almost want to say. But that's the thing. I mean, it's indicative of, I would say, communist type solutions. They never, to their proponents, not work. I mean, no matter how abysmal the results are, all it says to them is that we need to try it again and again, and only next time, with other people, with better people in charge, are we going to find, or are we going to achieve the required solutions. I mean, it's just been flip-flopping. And, and I mean, I said this earlier in my earlier speaking to him, that, to the extent that the ANC does not recognize that their very own actions are working to their own detriment, it's going to be the dissolution of the African National Congress. They have to recognize that people have gotten to a point where they have just completely lost interest and lost trust in, the state apparatus, and that is going to completely, as Nzuzo said, hurt the ANC in the polls. There's something that I actually wanted to say in response to Nzuzo's point. We actually have a challenge in South Africa where, people are, incapable of recognizing that how they vote and how they live are directly correlated. The sense of political illiteracy in South Africa is a point that we need to take very, very seriously, because people will complain about the government in charge, but they will then continue to vote in the same way that they've been voting all along, in the hope and basically in the faith that things will continue to change, which of course is not going to be the case. We need people to recognize that how they vote and how they live are directly correlated. When people recognize that, and when the ANC finally recognizes that people are starting to recognize that, they, I think, will start changing and start behaving accordingly.
And you raised an important point around people not believing the nonsense. I want to play a short clip of an establishment, a party venue, I'll call it that, that I was at. A very short clip. And bear in mind, the email, or pardon me, the social media buzz was going around. Oh, the president is speaking, the president is speaking. But let me show you how seriously folks took. There you go. I don't know if you saw that or you even heard that, but party as usual. People, again, I must be frank, I must be honest. The particular venue insisted on masks and hand sanitizing and all that nonsense. But in real terms, when people then sit down, they go, well, hang on, what's the risk level for me walking to this table, sitting down and getting food, where I can now suddenly take the mask off and be rebellious, versus walking in where I have to put a mask on, hand sanitizing, I must keep an eye on curfew times, because hey, once the clock hits 10, COVID is just out there looking for me. People recognize something silly when it's, even if people recognize something silly, even if it's threatened to them with the threat of state violence. Nzuzo and then Koketso.
Yeah, man. I guess it's the price you pay for Ugumnandi, but at the end of the day, I think that a lot of people have fed into this trap about lockdown, COVID, COVID hitting you only after 10 o'clock. I guess at the end of the day, you don't want, the police running down on your establishment when everyone is not wearing a mask, when you're not pushing in putting in the necessary measures. And I understand that, but nonetheless, at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense. You got to do something that's rational. And at the end of the day, I think that just listening to Ramaphosa and the way he even conducts himself through his presidency is he's just talk or no action. And this is why most of the time when I hear him, it's just like you're not necessarily affecting any change in the economy. You're not affecting any change in people's lives. And to even think that you're doing something by implementing these measures, such as mask before you enter into establishment, such as having to get home by 10 o'clock, it's like you're not really doing anything, because firstly, it's illogical. And secondly, you're not even doing the necessary things, such as fixing the hospitals, ensuring you didn't even bring in vaccines at the right time, knowing you're allowing people, right, everyone who is able to administer vaccines to do so. You just want to take monopoly over that as well, yet you still fail. And on top of that, you have corrupt officials that are eating the money of the vaccines of COVID. We still yet to know where the 500 billion rand is. So it's just like, why are we even invested in all these measures that are being taken by government if we're not even getting what we want in reciprocation from government? We're not getting the necessary services that we require. We're not getting the money required. I mean, for example, they couldn't even provide welfare for people who had, at the right time, for people who had lost their jobs due to COVID. So it's just like it's failure after failure after failure. But yet we are expected as citizens to wear our mask and then take off our mask when we enter into when we enter into rockets, when we enter into these establishments. Why? Why? I sort of have a good time. I sort of have a good time. I'm not worried about this COVID thing, because firstly, maybe I've taken the vaccine, or it doesn't have that actually much of an effect as a young person. I'm not saying that it's not going to have an effect on the older people, but I'm saying that the measures that you are taking are not assisting in the situation at all. And all you're doing is just trying to please people without no results coming from that. So, yeah, man, it's frustrating.
No, rightly so. And I must bring it to you, Koketso, because that little image I flighted as a popular Shisanyama here in Durban. I was there with some friends, having some beers. We were chilling, hanging out, throwing signs up. You know how it is. And one of the things I found very interesting is the people have a much more realistic sense of the personal risk they're willing to take insofar as COVID-19 and the seriousness at which they will take it, as opposed to being told something, not taking that seriously, and perhaps placing themselves at risk of falling foul of the state. So what am I trying to say here? It seemed to me that people are more aware of the amount of risk they're willing to take insofar as mitigating the risk of COVID-19, but won't worry themselves about what the state, I see you, Phila, won't worry necessarily of sorry, I lost my point a little bit, but won't worry about what Johnny government says. Now, as you think about this particular point, Connie, I'll come to you just after Phila, because he wants to get that point in. What I also find interesting is really this. I talked to a lot of the revelers there, fellow Umlazi residents, and I asked them the question, do you follow the lockdown rules to a T? And obviously there's no poll, so to speak, but the overwhelming majority of them said F. One of them even saying F these lockdown rules. They do drag Philly squats to deal with the COVID-19. The one person I asked even went as far as saying, my parents literally followed these rules to the T. Masks, even at home, masks, hand sanitizer, the works, but the one parent, the mother, still got the virus and died from it. The other parent got it, recovered, and then they asked themselves the question as a couple, before the mom died, what was the point of the rules then if it really doesn't either A, stop the spread, as they were being told, and the indoctrination around it, or B, when they then try to go to hospital, there was no one, or pardon me, there was no space in hospital. People are beginning to ask serious questions, and it seems as though asking those questions is a taboo today.
Yeah, so Phila had his hand up there. I don't know.
No, sorry, I was going to come to you then, Phila, but Phila, go ahead.
No, I just had a runaway comment. I just thought, I just basically wanted to present something for us to chew on, because it's something that I've been pondering about, and especially when you made the point, Sisha, I just thought it would be something worthwhile to bring to the table. Are we expecting, or is what we're expecting of people fair of them? We make the assumption that people left to their own devices will be able to make their own informed medical decisions. But it seems to me that the ability for one to make their own medical decisions is contingent upon, them being receptive, to the facts, and the facts being actively presented to them. Now, what we're seeing now is that people are cherry picking facts given where they stand on the COVID narrative. So you have people who will say, no, the vaccines work, and you've got another very, very strong antagonistic group that will say vaccines do not work. So it seems to me a bit unfair and expecting a bit too much from an illiterate populace. We know this by the statistics, to be able to discern for themselves and to be able to make for themselves very, very complex medical decisions on insufficient or sometimes tampered with facts. It seems to me just a bit unfair to expect of people who might not know very much, to be able to make their own decisions, especially because of how distorted and how in conflict all the facts that are being presented in the mainstream seem to be. I'm not
for
sure.
Maybe for sure, and maybe as I throw it back to Koketso, Connie, I know we sort of traversed you a little bit, and I had a funny comment on screen. That's why I was giggling away here in the background. It seems the BDL show has instituted a BEE of guests tonight. I really found that funny. But I'll come to you just now, Connie, because I think Phila raises a good point, which is, Phila, effectively what you're asking is, this is what happens, or this is the effect, rather, of weaponizing information, where instead of information being what it is, fact-based, so as to allow the individual to make decisions about the amount of risk they're willing to take on, instead of that being the case, we've now seen a case where powerful narratives and lobbies behind these narratives, either because COVID-19 represents more political power for them, or on the other hand, COVID-19 represents a financial gain for them, will literally push narratives that serve the grift and not necessarily serve to inform the public. And this is why I take exception to the COVID grift, as I label it, because it does a disservice to the member of public who's looking for actual information, factual information, to then base their response as the individual on. Koketso, I loaded you earlier on. Let me get your comment, and then Connie, I must come to you.
Right. Now I don't know where to begin. But look, I'm going to go back to what Gareth Cliff said in his open letter to the president last year, the one that got him in trouble with certain sectors of society, I guess, the type who like to scream, "How dare you," in Greta Thunberg's voice. But his overall message, one of his overall messages was, listen, I'll take my chances. And it really does come down to that, where people have been taking their chances with everything up until COVID, before COVID, with other things that aren't COVID, etc., etc. So I'll make a quick example here. we all know about the HIV pandemic, for example, right? And then government does a mass campaign to say, right, guys, yeah, the abstinence message clearly isn't working, so please, let's roll out condoms. They're free. TV ads, radio ads, poster ads. You couldn't walk into a medical facility of some sort if without coming across a poster about HIV, and of course a free condom dispenser, right? But people still took their chances, and none of this was mandatory. And even when you factor in things like a vaccine passport, I don't remember us having to have a vaccine passport for things like HIV status, because medical information is very personal, right? But now we're slowly getting into the realm of, no, you need to be able to disclose and discern a COVID status, either on a printed piece of cardboard or on a digital app of some sort. So yeah, we've never had an excuse to do this sort of thing before, even with much deadlier viruses like TB, malaria, etc. Heck, even cancer patients, yes, I know it's not contagious, but no one ever has to now submit themselves to a database of some sort whenever they have any form of ailment, but all of a sudden it's becoming acceptable. But yeah, going into what Phila was saying though about, how we need to manage the expectation, and that much of the population is illiterate, whether we like it or not, and you can't expect people to make certain decisions based on certain information. Of course, I understand that fully, but at the same time, I know a campaign when I see one. And I joke about this a lot, particularly around family meetings, where the president will gladly come out and say that, listen, we have been engaging with scientists, expert advisors, both locally and internationally, and I want to know who are these people. We are told of unnamed faceless people who come up with all sorts of grand plans about how we can get out of how we can actually soldier on through the pandemic as a country. But they are nameless, faceless, and the most important thing really for me is that we don't even get to see this data set that the government insists it is making or basing their decisions off of. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm fairly good with Excel, so hey, why don't they make publicly available the data? I can draw my own graphs out of that. I can do my own calculations. I can run my own statistical model. Why don't they actually give us this data of which they make their own decisions on? Or maybe if it's a bit too confidential, why don't they actually release the actual reports that they say they're basing their decisions on as well? And it can come from whatever expertise that they rely on, but why don't we ever see these public reports? All we find out about these is a couple of medical experts who go on radio saying that they're engaging with government, and of course the president coming onto TV and giving us yet another speech about how lockdown is going to be altered for the immediate future. It's really baffling. But over and above that, right, I think we really have to step back here and actually look at the kind of leadership we have. Like we rightly mentioned, I think, all of us in some way did mention this, that we are living in a country that has incompetent leadership. Incompetent to the fact that it, even beyond the 2 weeks of lockdown to prepare the healthcare system, right? We have to ask ourselves, but was the healthcare system ever going to be prepared? It wasn't even prepared for day-to-day living pre-COVID. And this is why private enterprise is such a thriving industry, not just in healthcare, but in other sectors of society. Security is another one I like to make an example out of. You pay tax money that is supposed to cover you from the policing perspective. But believe you me, when you're in trouble, you do not call 10111, you call your local security company, or at the very least, you go on a community WhatsApp group where you know something will be done about it. So these are really signs of an incompetent government that haven't been able to deliver on anything. And so we were never going to reach a point where we can expect them to deliver something like a vaccine. And definitely if they do introduce things like vaccine mandates and passports and that sort of thing, I don't even expect them to succeed at that. I mean, we're sitting with a driver's license issue right now. Right now, they can't even issue you a speeding ticket in an efficient manner right now as we speak, right? So this is it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? They're very ambitious in thinking that they can do this rollout of digital of digital vaccine passports and the like.
Ambitious, but rubbish.
And considering that they haven't even got the actual rollout correctly. So, they're actually jumping 10 steps ahead, and they're really trying to play on easy when they haven't mastered the game. They're trying to play on hard when they haven't mastered the game on easy.
And that last point you're making, I'm going to throw it to Connie, is actually critically important. South Africans must thank their lucky stars that we have the incompetent, wannabe socialist as it is, wannabe overly statist and control everything as it is, but woefully incompetent in its attempt to implement this. Because we could have found ourselves in a situation like the Australians do, where actually their government isn't incompetent. Their government can implement a lot of this mess, and it becomes, as is the case, hashtag Australia has fallen, as is the case where there are Australians right now who are even facing the barrel of the gun. I'm being a little dramatic, but effectively that's what a state diktat comes to. There is state violence behind a mandate. And because what happens to you, I often ask people, what do you think happens to you if you say no to a state official? The guns come out at that point. So that level of efficiency is scary when you think about what they're trying to do in enforcing a lot of these mandates. Speaking about mandates, and I'll get to you, Connie, really, I promise. Speaking about vaccine mandates and the like, on the Big Daddy Liberty show this Wednesday, I'm having this debate with, of course, the likes of Martin van Staden, Chris Hatting from the Free Market Foundation, Ivo Vechter and Jonathan Katzenellenbogen, who wrote interesting pieces calling for vaccine mandates and arguing that they're not an assault on liberty. We're going to have them on. And of course, Nick Hudson will be a part of this debate. Are vaccine mandates an assault on your life, liberty, and property rights? That's this Wednesday on the Big Daddy Liberty Show, 7 p.m. Connie, let me come to you because, again, you've heard the breast of this conversation. You know, we've traversed a few topics as we've done this, but really it comes down to a question that the average South African, the average worker, if I can bring in your expertise, needs to ask themselves, is the risk of COVID-19 worth a lockdown that as a worker has destroyed my ability to put bread on the table? One of many consequences of this lockdown. Or do we need to move in a different direction in addressing this virus?
I think the main problem, and we saw this very, very instantly, is that the ANC tends to govern for the country they want, not the one they have. And they think they've got a much more competent state sector than they do. They think they've got much more literate citizens and much more active citizens. And as well, for some weird reason, we're convinced that we can make national mandates work. In the beginning of COVID and the lockdown, we actually tried our best. I don't think you're the only one that got sort of dribbled, Sihle. The first 2-3 weeks, the short answer is there was this crisis bearing down on us. Everyone saw what happened in Italy. You see people dying in the hospital hallways, and you're obviously worried about this. And we then said, all right, let's work together. And what we found was that the hand of cooperation was just smacked away repeatedly. There was no chance. Government absolutely insisted, we are going to do this alone. We're going to do this by ourselves. We repeatedly tried to tell them, all right, guys, just start making sense of it. Why are you banning warm chicken in a Woolworths? How is this? This does not make any sense. The second part was when we told them, for some weird reason, every single liquor store in the Northern Cape is closed and they have 13 active cases. What are you doing? We've got why are you just pressing the one button, which is national lockdown every time? The virus obviously moves from city to city, province to province. Why not have it much more decentralized? Why not try something like that? If you have to do medical interventions, we even tried to wrote them the state of hospitals, which is for some weird reason, in the beginning, the Western Cape was absolutely hammered, if you remember correctly, and those hospitals were over flooded and they were in trouble. But the Free State, Gauteng, and those were not. So we said, but why not shift some resources? Let's keep the Gauteng open, keep the economy open. Let's get some resources. We need tax money if you're going to go that way. We need the economy running to fight this virus. And they then just simply shut down Gauteng, which had the implication. It's rough as the hospitals were empty and people were losing money. Doctors lost like 90 to 95% of their income because people aren't coming for flu and they're not coming for elective surgeries. So none of this made sense. Now, the harsh reality of that is, Phila makes a very good point. The average citizen is not, and it's not reasonable to expect from them to know these type of medical questions. But they usually can make sense of experts or institutions telling them, this is what we found. That's specialization, that's a modern economy, that's the way it works. But when you just pull everything into the state, and then you are exceptionally incompetent. South Africa has certain lockdown rules that no other country in the world has. For some reason, we've got curfew. No one can understand why this would stop the virus. Nothing makes sense. We banned short pants. I don't know if you remember, for some random reason, we banned short pants. Now, the only thing you're managing with that is the trust in institutions is eroded completely. And now citizens are struggling, grasping for air, not knowing who to trust, what to trust, where to go. And that's where misinformation then absolutely festers and starts creating a massive problem regarding no one knows what's going on with COVID. No one trusts any data anymore. And in that sense, then you're in trouble, because there are certain things that you can do to minimize your risk. We know certain things work. We know other things don't work. Our government tells us this works. And then when you just do the logical common sense test, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You showed those people in the bar. For some weird reason, to this day, I still struggle to understand why the 4 steps I take into a restaurant, I'm contagious, but the moment I sit down, I'm not. These things are what bothers us. Now, this comes down to one simple fact, and that is government bet on themselves. They made a large bet on themselves, and they lost badly. They lost really badly. We, from the beginning, said, well, these guys were really bad at governing in the good times. We're not going to expect them to be good at governing in the bad times. And we saw that play out 100%. Our frustration eventually just turned to, we just plain started doing the things ourselves. I don't know if you remember, we had massive problems with people needing food, our members. And we started distributing that just ourselves with our own structures. And then government actually wrote us and said, well, we need to first mandate what they want to centrally distribute it.
That was the Department of Social Development that came after you guys. I remember that.
Exactly, because they want to make sure the food does not have worms in it. And we didn't answer politically correct. We basically told them off.
Rightly so.
I won't quote our CEO because it's not a proper language, but that got the correct reaction. And we just made a decision as an organization that we are not going to stop giving people food. If that's what you're arrested for, then that's fine. We'll go that way. And that's the same thing we're seeing now happening with several other things. I think the lockdown has, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist, except for a couple of sectors in the middle class, which still comply. Most of us would wear a mask when the police are close by, or adhere to curfew if you're sort of scared of.
You haven't been to Mlazi, Connie. I can tell you that. No one cares.
Exactly, but that's the thing is in the metros a bit, and then what just frustrates you ceaselessly is we've got actual serious crime problem in South Africa, but our police insist on arresting people who run after their 2-year-olds on the beach and not doing anything against actual serious crime. We leave that for the neighborhood watchers to clear it up, but trust the police to arrest middle-aged women who need to look after their children. That's the thing. So the trust that has been eroded means, and that's where we come in the positive part, institutions that are still trusted are, well, we know we are by our community for the simple reason we've been extremely transparent in our communication. We told them from the start, listen, we don't know a lot about this virus. We're going to find out. What we know, we shared. What we don't know, what works, we shared. What if it doesn't work anymore, then we say, look, we thought this works, but it doesn't work anymore. Let's go that way. And the shining example of how you do that was Denmark, quite frankly, which from the very start, the government said, we're not going to do this alone. We need your help. Even Sweden. Well, Denmark has now lifted all restrictions, but citizens are at a point where they say, all right, the government, they don't quite know what they're doing, but they will need our help. And if our government just plain went and said, look, guys, we've got a 25-year record of cocking things up. We're going to need the private sector's help here. Let's see if we can get this virus under control. That would have been fine. Instead, you've got Mr. with immediate effect who tells you on a Sunday night if you have a job on Monday. And if they think that the problem that we're seeing in the future, and this is something that worries us a lot.
Connie, I'm going to have to just pause you there for a moment, Connie, just for a brief moment, because I must keep an eye on time. We're in the final 30 minutes of Liberty and Friends. If we don't get through all our topics, I might ask my panel just to indulge me with another 15 minutes. But I do want us to keep an eye on time, fellas. We are on a time imperative. Goodness me, struggle to find that word. Deborah Olivier, baie dankie vir die ondersteuning. Ek sien daai 140 rand. I hope I said that properly. Thank you very much, Deborah. I appreciate that. I must move us on. And Connie, I'm actually going to come to you because it's the tax revolt issue. That's the issue I really wanted to unpack tonight. You guys have launched a fantastic campaign which has the full support of us here at the Big Daddy Liberty Show. In fact, I'm going to get in touch with you guys there at Solidarity because I have some ideas that I can run with in support of this particular campaign. But before I jump the gun in that regard, there is a desperate need for South Africans to begin to have this conversation. In fact, we've almost done the priming work of it in terms of arguing that politicians, the bigger the government gets, the bigger politicians or the more power, politicians have, the more life becomes miserable for the average citizen, the vast majority of whom are taxpayers in one form or the other, whether it's personal income taxes or VAT, whatever. All South Africans in some form are taxpayers. And there is a frustration that is growing in that regard, where what the politicians say and what they're doing simply doesn't match what the faith, flag, family, and freedom type South African who just wants to get on with things and live in a safe, prosperous and free society. There's a mismatch between those two, and surely beyond the vote there is something the ordinary citizen must be able to do, perhaps withdrawing or withholding funding those politicians is an option. Connie, talk to us. What is your campaign all about?
I think, Sisha, there are two numbers which should really keep you awake at night. The first is, although everyone pays VAT, realistically, I think there's about 3.4 million people who pay 91% of the income tax. Now, that's completely unsustainable. There's no way that you can have a country that at this moment has, I think it's 18 million grants being paid to children and pensioners, and base that on 3 million people's income. It's not going to work. It just doesn't happen. This is an abject failure in broadening the tax base, quite frankly, and that's because the economy is not growing. The second is that if we look at tax as a percentage of GDP, we've got the second highest rate in the world. That means that these very few people, we are taxing to the extremes of what is possible. And that's, I think, the straw that just broke the camel's back from our side. Then you put the NHI, which is a white paper, which would raise the tax rates for, I think, if you're earning between 7,000 and 30,000 rand a month, which is not by all means living large. That's you're basically surviving. You're going to see an increase of about 50% in your tax rate just for the NHI. Then they put the green paper in for the Social Security Fund, which means aspirationally they want to pay 7,500 rand to every South African. Now that's somebody I think who was high when they typed that. There's no way that you can get that done with the money that we've got at the moment, and that means that you're looking at, if you're earning, I think 20 to 30,000 rand, which for interest sake, 60% of our members earn less than 30,000 rand a month. That's just your normal middle class guys. They're struggling to make ends meet. You're going to see a 300%, or I think it's 200 to 300% increase in your tax, and that's the end of personal wealth. So we went to our executive council and said, but all right, we need to do something about this. So the first step in this campaign is obviously we've been to the courts quite a couple of times, and we don't lose often. And we're going to go and take this legislation to court as well. It's completely unreasonable. It doesn't make any sense. At some point you need to realize that you do not have the budget to do this, and there's just no way. Until the economy grows, we can't even start thinking about these policies. We'll have a long debate about the morality of policies like this, which we also think is I can't swear on your show, so I'll use my limited English vocabulary to say sort of crazy, but it's madness, man. The second part is we're now actively, I had several meetings last week, and I've got meetings in this week as well. We are looking at a task team to see how we can restructure our members' tax as hopefully as a benefit for members, to get them to pay as little tax as possible. At the moment, it's the first step. It's very tricky to get around pay in a legal way. There's a lot of laws that you need to skirt. But from our perspective, if we can knock the tax burden from our members down 5 to 10%, that's a very good start, and we think we can go even further. For the simple reason, I think the rest of the panel will get to that. At the moment, if you're a South African citizen, you're doing all the government's work, and you're paying them to not do their work. We saw that in Natal with the riots. The guys who eventually had law and order were community members who had to step in. Now, that's the number one function of a government. It's just safety and security, a small government. They can't even do that, yet you're paying hundreds of thousands of, billions of rands in salaries to get that done. And then they insist, look, not only are we not going to do safety and security, we would be very interested in not doing health, but being paid for it, in not doing pension, but being paid for it. And that's where it needs to stop. So we're looking at several ways of, can we get to a point where if you're paying private security, that should be tax deductible. If you're participating in a neighborhood watch something, that's something that you should not have to pay government then for, because you're actually enforcing safety and security. And that's why we're actually quite excited about the debate in the NCOP this past week, where finally we're looking at devoluting power, getting federalism, just getting people who actually do the job, getting them the funds to do it at some point. And that's federalism and subsidiarity in short. So our campaign has kicked off now. We're really looking at how can you pay these guys as little as possible. From our perspective, we've got a couple of Christian hurdles to cross. If you're Christian, which the majority of our members and Afrikaners in general are, then you run up against the ultimate argument from authority, which is Jesus saying, "Pay to the Caesar what he should get." But we're on the second part of that equation, which is, but then let's go calculate what the Caesar actually should get, and we're of the opinion very, very little, not a lot.
And let me throw it to the rest of the panel, because this is a fantastic campaign, which I think has the potential, given how hurtful South Africans are. And there you go, I'll swear for you in Afrikaans there, Connie. Given how really fed up we are as a country, South Africans just simply cannot continue paying for something they're not getting. Worse yet, we're talking even about poor South Africans here. So remember, poor South Africans also pay tax. When that poor Gogo walks into a ShopRite or a Pick n Pay or a Boxer store and buys the groceries, and of what she spends, 15% accrues to her nothing and must go to a politician, she's paid 15% of her meager income to the state. That's 15% of that spending that could have gone into an extra loaf of bread, some milk, and maybe even a sack of rice. These are real everyday issues. Tax involves and talks to millions, if not the vast majority of adult South Africans. Fellas, let me throw it to you guys, and Nzuzo, I'll come to you.
Just to come in there quickly, we actually did the calculations for what is your effective tax rate, and if you're earning, I think it's 640 rand a month, which is really just baseline. You're exempt from income tax, but just through VAT, those things, you've got an effective tax rate of, I think it's 7 to almost 10%, which is unfathomable. Which means we calculated it to make it sort of concrete. If you get to work at 8 in the morning, then you're working for the government. If you're earning 600 rand a month until 8:34, you're not working for yourself. If you're in the 10th decile, which means you're earning more than 8,000 rand a month, if you're there, you are working for the government until 11:24. When you get to your job at 8 in the morning, which means I've now decided I'm doing absolutely nothing until 11:25, because I'm obviously working for the government at that time. After that, I'll start working.
And again, we make light of this, but this is a very serious issue. In fact, back in my more radical libertarian days on social media, I coined the hashtag ban income tax, because I'm still of the view that an income tax is actually theft. It's pure theft insofar as you've done the work. These should be the fruits of your labor, but some politicians seem to think they can molest your pockets and take a portion of your income out for nothing in return. In most cases, it simply doesn't make sense. Now, the libertarian arguments aside, Nzuzo, there's surely merit in this conversation in terms of, hey, maybe it is time we put pressure on the politicians to say your income will be affected, and you too, dear Johnny politician, will find yourself on the breadline potentially.
Yes, see, there is merit. It's more than just merit. It's garbage, what they're actually putting up in terms of policy, in terms of tax, and this is why so many people are taking their money offshore, because it's like, why do I even need to be contributing any taxes? Why do I need to be contributing anything if you guys are not doing anything for me and you still want more? I might as well take my money offshore, and you'll see many more prohibitions by the Reserve Bank in terms of exchange control regulations, trying to stop people from pushing money abroad. Shout out to Solidariteit for actually coming up with such a strategy. Someone had to do it. Someone had to take charge, and someone that even is not a member such as myself, I'd like to contribute to that fund in terms of the legal costs that have to be put up to just fight the government. This is it's unbelievable, man. Like people that are earning just above, living wage now have to have their taxes increased by, you said 300%. That's insanity. What the hell? Like, how does that even? Who what are they smoking? I wish I could smoke the same thing, because come on, like how could you have put that on a piece of paper and said, let's publish that? At the end of the day, like you said, taxation is theft, and I'm only doing it so I can help my fellow brothers who might not have, enough money to, fix their roads or pick up their litter. But to take 12% on top of the many other taxes, we have estate duty, we have capital gains tax, we have transfer duty, we have VAT, we have income tax, there's taxes coming out my ass. Sorry for the swear, but like to be honest, like this can't continue. It can't continue for and the real problem is that we have these public servants who are earning in the millions. I mean, every single manager from national to local government is earning over R1 million, but yet they do nothing. They do absolutely nothing. Many of the SOEs are broke, but they're still earning R1 million over. Many of the departments are broke, but they're still earning R1 million over. Yet they still want more. It's just like you leeches. Yes, like it's disgusting, man. And when you go to the rural towns, when you go to these townships, and you see how much, it's just been, the services are just non-existent, you ask yourself, why should I even pay tax at all? Why should I even contribute tax in any way possible? And you can try to guilt trip me and saying that no, it's for social welfare, it's for the social grant, but it's like you're not even the social grant itself is not enough to put the basic items into one's basket at the end of the month. How could you continue saying to me social welfare is good? So this paying taxes is good. Paying taxes is good when it's actually not. This is why I actually support Solidariteit's proposal, the tax protest, the tax revolt. They must keep going. It's worth the fight. Let's take it to the court. Let's take it to constitutional court and look the Chief Justice in the eye and say, if you continue on this track and you support this nonsense, then you shouldn't be shocked when people loot. You shouldn't be shocked when people steal. You shouldn't be shocked when people don't adhere to the law, when the people that are supposed to be enforcing the law are the ones breaking it. So, it has to be a point where some of these people in the judiciary have to say, this is enough. Enough is enough. You can't keep on, just leeching away on people's pockets. People are working day and night just to put food on their table. Connie said that, you still have to pay 10% on your 450 Rand grant. Like, come on. Like, it's just like, how could you take that? Where's the morality in that? How is that logical in any way? So yeah, man, it has to be supported. And yeah, man, you got to support it in me.
And let me pivot the conversation. And Connie, this is where I wanted to come in. Insofar as I made the argument, I want to support this initiative physically, because I think it has merit, and it needs more of a ground war than, sort of exclusively being in the courts or exclusively being in the media. It needs a ground war element where you reach out to grassroots organizations which already are absolutely frustrated with the state of things. Let me be precise and specific. There is an organization here in Durban called Abahlali Basemjondolo, the Shack Dwellers Association. ABM is a fantastic organization insofar as it has organized shack dwellers in various parts of the city to leverage their rights, and obviously more than just leverage their rights, to be aware of their responsibilities. Now, nothing's perfect. Nirvana is not for this world. So I'm not suggesting the work that they do is perfect and everything is hunky-dory. But the argument I'm making here is this. An initiative like this one could quickly be nixed by politicians who would basically posit you guys on one side and say, you see, the taxpayers, the rich whites, they'll often say, the white monopoly capital doesn't want to us as politicians to take from them in order to give to you, the poor black masses, the African child, as we often hear the likes of Julius Malema and other black politicians condescendingly refer to us as black South Africans. This kind of thing can easily fall into that trap, the usual race trap that characterizes South Africa. But actually, I put it to you, Connie, and this is why I want to have a chat with you guys. If you started at a grassroots level with a lot of organizations already are beginning to raise the alarm around the taxes that are already being taken, not reaching them as the poor. In other words, that value chain stopping at the elites, basically, because of the enrichment, you will have a very powerful lobby, a very powerful voice behind you that can then not only put pressure in the courts, when Nzuzo rightly says it needs to happen, but also socio-politically, where the average politician, especially the local government politician, realizes they risk losing that support of the so-called masses. Why? Because you guys have reached them with a salient, on-the-ground type campaign. I'll speak to you guys offline and I'll get in touch with you around how we could potentially do that. But this is where I want to bring in Koketso and Phila. I'll come to you after this. Because, you know, as I was preparing for the show, I took a walk, my usual, I take walks now for health reasons, but I took a walk and I spoke to old neighbors, especially the older, you know, the gogos and, you know, the irazo, as we call them here in the township. And one of the common things I hear them say is this, you know, imali ikona, the money's there, they'll say. The problem is, look at who's getting it, whose pockets it's going into. And then they started citing various entrepreneurs here in Umlazi who are great beneficiaries of state largesse and state contracts. So there is a recognition on the ground that actually we know that people are being taxed and the money is there, as they said, but it's simply not reaching us. It's going into the pockets of the elites. Surely a campaign like this one begins to bring this to the forefront politically. Koketso?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, we I think all of us here, we are well aware of what exactly a free market is. And even though we have a government that promises to actually be proponents of a free market, it's really not the case because of because of bad policies. You know, that whole thing of how we are the only country in the world where the majority, from a demographic perspective, actually wants to institute something like affirmative action, which completely defeats the purpose, for example. And so we sit with the reality where the policies that are designed to fulfill the promise of enriching people, particularly Black people, who have been historically disadvantaged because of the previous regime, which is 3 decades ago, of course. The policies designed to actually correct that aren't actually correcting it, and then they create this whole dichotomy of there's 2 different classes of people. Now, where normal people see this in their everyday, day-to-day life, isn't really, they don't really have to go far, if I can put it like that. It starts off with how a parent then works hard to put their child through school. And then the child goes through school, and after graduating, etc., there is an expectation that, you will then get a job. And with your newfound job, my child, you will then be able to, firstly stand on your own and hopefully be able to contribute back to your community, back to your parents, and also be a shining role model for those that come after you. But that doesn't happen because even as a Black person, you are an outcast in a lot of conversations if you're not partisan to the ruling party. And that's what it comes down to. So the money is always there, the opportunity is always there, but the opportunity only exists for those who, when you're filling in a Z83 form, also happen to attach a copy of your ANC membership card. In addition to your ID book and all of those, it forms part of the CV. Now, I'll tell you a story of someone I know who is a Black person who lives in suburbia, and after applying for a government job, having the requisite type of qualification. I'm talking now international relations and the like from Wits University. Still couldn't get a job because Z83 insists that you list your physical address. And when people, if she eventually inquired about, why didn't she make the cut? Why was she not shortlisted? They told her to her face that, oh no, but you're from suburbia, so we'd rather give this job to someone from a township area who needs the job more than you do. You probably have a roof over your head. You don't, you're probably living a nice life with paved roads and the like. So how do you, how do you actually contextualize that? How's this person meant to feel where first you're told that you must be black to apply, but even when you're black, there's always a hidden criteria or a hidden motive, or you always don't make the cut somehow, whether it's missing partisan membership, or whether you happen to live in an area that is deemed to be more affluent than some others. So this creates different classes, not just between, not just at a basic level, such as blacks versus whites, rich versus poor, but even amongst those that these policies are meant to help. It creates further micro classes of those who have and those who have not, without any evidence to back it up, of course. I'll use things that I've experienced, and this is normally primarily from black people. Now, I speak with an East Joburg accent, right? I have never had Caucasian folk, for example, belittle me because of how I speak. That kind of comes always from people of similar skin color, who once they hear me speaking, they draw their own conclusions and assumptions. Meanwhile, if I speak my Setswana from back home, this is not the Johannesburg Setswana. Most people will not understand me because it hasn't been diluted by Joburg. So it's things like that where there's a perpetuation that erodes culture, but has some economic consequences because people can't even take advantage of the very policies the government keep perpetuating. And chief culprit of course, is our president, whose face literally lights up every time he mentions how he's going to double down on BEE. And what's the new word now? Create equitable access. That's the new word these days. Everything is always equitable.
It's been very
access.
good to him. That's possibly why his face lights up. This man is not a businessman. The president of this country is not a businessman. He's a beneficiary of race-based policy that literally has given him hand over fist wads of cash simply because, one, he's politically connected, two, he happens to have dark brown skin. It is absolutely morally repugnant that we have policy in this country and we call it somehow progressive, or the lefties will call it absolutely great for blacks, when the vast majority of black South Africans live in squalor. That chap I always talk about, who lives in a shack on a sand dune in Cape Town, is not a BEE beneficiary and will never be one for the rest of his life. I must move on to Phila. And Phila, I'm going to twist the question a little bit to you, because I don't want it to be like a praise and worship session here of the tax revolt campaign. I want us to talk about the broader implications here. Fellas, it's just gone 9:30, even as I said that I must ask for another 15 minutes, and then we have to wrap up. And then we'll close with you, Connie, because it's your campaign. Phila, even as I bring it to you, Connie raised this point quite aptly in terms of linking two things here. The notion of the devolution of power, the importance of that, and decentralizing power. I raised this in the context of the very debate that Connie was speaking about that happened in the National Council of Provinces this week, effectively between the DA and the ANC and the various governments that they both occupy. The ANC obviously national, by way of a one beggy, the asshat police minister, representing the South African Police Services, and of course, Alan Winde and it's my former boss, I can't think of his name right now, the Community Safety MEC in the Western Cape, Albert Fritz. Full disclosure for those who didn't know and they're hearing me say it for the first time, I used to be quite senior up as a staff member, not a politician, in the Democratic Alliance. I used to be a spokesperson for social development in the Western Cape. So I know politicians very well. That's why when I say politicians are trash, trust me, it's coming from somewhere. But I digress. This conversation, this debate happens in the NCOP, and effectively, Bekele goes, well, you know, what you guys are trying to do is federalism. And he says it as if it's a bad thing, as if it's a naughty word. How dare you try and devolve power and put it as close to people as possible, according to Bekele's reasoning. But it's this notion of decentralizing federalism, really, that's at the heart of a campaign and why we should support a campaign like a tax revolt. Surely, power should be in the hands of the ordinary citizen.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. And I was going to, if you guys permitted me, introduce a spanner in the workings a bit, because while I can understand and hear the arguments that are, you know, put forth for a tax revolt, I can't help but, you know, sit on the fence a little bit. No, so I'll put it in this way. It seems to me that a large part of the argument is hinged upon, you know, punishing politicians, which I will of course agree, you know, need to be punished. I absolutely agree that, you know, for as long as the ANC continue, you know, occupying public offices and, you know, for personal gain and not, you know, delivering efficient services to people who need them, that at some point the, you know, fire runs out of oxygen and, you know, there's no more wood left to burn. I absolutely agree with that, and I absolutely agree that the ANC need to be punished. But it seems to me that a tax revolt will predominantly hurt the very people we are concerned about. It seems to me that it's the poor and the disenfranchised South Africans that are going to, you know, feel the worst effects of a tax revolt. And I can completely understand why, you know, the logic is put forth. I think the argument makes sense, but it seems to me that the people who we, you know, want to punish are going to emerge by and large unscathed from a tax revolt of the sort that, you know, is being proposed. You know, it just seems to me that poor people are going to feel the full brunt of this. And, you know, I worry increasingly about this because of what we saw a few weeks or a few months ago now in KZN, where people, you know, dissatisfied by the state, you know, take to the streets, and there's absolute anarchy in the country. And I think what tax does is that, you know, it's I guess the price we pay for security in a country, for political stability as well. You know, if we want a population, you know, that will be able to live in a country peacefully and coercively and you know, in coexistence, then I think the price we're going to have to pay is some sort of tax. And I just really think that a tax revolt is going to hurt, you know, the poorest and, you know, most people who live in squalor and destitution. So maybe that is something that we can, you know, chew on in the few minutes that remain. But I think just to the point that Sihle raised about Bekele and Ellen Windy, and I think a lot of people, you know, sort of turn a blind eye or, you know, just shriek their noses at the idea of federalism because it seems to them that federalism is an argument against organization. And I think it must be made clear that it is not an argument against organization. It's an argument against monopolistic, hegemonistic, and exclusive organization in favor of organization that is put, you know, to the very grassroots of a particular country. We want South Africans to be able to govern themselves, and I think federalism is exactly that. But yeah, I think the most of the arguments against federalism are predicated upon a misunderstanding of the very principle, and I think it's worthwhile perhaps unpacking what it is that it actually means. Absolutely,
and perhaps to that point, I'm going to come to you tomorrow, and then I must give you, Connie, an opportunity to respond to some of these points. But, you know, Phila raises a good point, but it's a point which we need to tackle as classical liberals, libertarians, those of us who are on the liberty spectrum, and even conservatives, by the way. We need to tackle it insofar as saying, who is best at organizing that society, right? So we all agree that there's some level of taxation that has to be leveraged because wherever you are on the spectrum of conservative, classical, liberal, libertarian, anarchists, in order to fund that government, that level of government that you particularly want and agree should exist, there will be some form of taxation. But the issue then becomes, who spends those tax funds? Yes, the funds will be taken by the state, but should it always be, or should it necessarily be the state official, the bureaucrat, the politician who spends it, or actually by way of community-based and community-organized means, really the faith flag, family freedom type individual in a voluntary organization, spending it in a way in which reflects their circumstances, right? Which speaks to that federalism, the idea that governance should happen as local as possible, given the factors that speak to your given area, your given municipality, province, or whatever the case may be. So these issues are linked. And I think it's something that even as we discuss it here, Connie must grapple with in terms of their own campaign, because they will hit these stumbling blocks and resistance in terms of their opponents, Dumo?
Yeah, that is actually correct. And then Phila also brought up a great point as well. I think, we shouldn't be too, what's the right word? We shouldn't think that the poor are going to revolt in the same way if there's a tax revolt. Already we've seen, even long before, we've seen places like Harry Smith, Grahamstown, where people actually decided that they're going to fix their own potholes and fix their own sewage systems and stuff like that, despite paying tax. And this means they actually had to take money out of their own pockets over and above the tax that they pay to the government in order to get that going. So we've seen some of that. And it's encouraging, in fact. It's very encouraging, because what that shows is that there are people out there who are willing to actually do something of this nature, go over and above the tax they pay to assist others. So I think that's the first part of it. And but again, it doesn't dismiss Phila's point. It does. Yeah. His concern is still a risk that needs to be taken into account. And I think with the whole idea of federalism as well, it's a great idea. Localizing the people that make the rules. I think also it's an important thing that we have to consider, because how can I put it? Politicians or people at national government, they don't pay the price for being wrong when they make these rules, because they're far away from the problem. People that are closer to the problem, they're more accountable, and therefore they should be the ones that make the rules or on the communities that they're governing. So rather, the people that make the decisions have to be closer to those communities. I mean, one perfect example is if you look at the Health Act, if a hospital has to be built in a small town, it has to be approved by the health minister who sits in Pretoria. So imagine someone who lives in Dutya, for example, and on the Manpatria podcast, we always use Dutya as an example, because it's just probably the most remote town that you can think of. And imagine now someone who's a Joe Pasha in Pretoria has to determine if a hospital needs to be built in Dutya, out of all places. It's ridiculous. Someone closer has to make that decision. Right. Absolutely. That's my point. Cool.
Absolutely, and that's the power of it. And Connie, I must come back to you therefore, because again, I don't want to get lost in these various sidetracks, important as they are, insofar as detracts from the campaign that you guys are launching. But I would put it to you, having heard the fellas, that actually the campaign that you're running on has the potential of being isolated as being, oh, this is what the middle class, of course, and the rich would say, right? And then be dismissed offhand. But in real terms, it can actually bring in the very poor and the very disenfranchised that we often refer to here, that's loosely called the masses by the politicians, by simply saying, actually, no, make the link. We're talking about the very same funds that are meant to devolve down to you. And Dumo raises the point that I wanted to then latch onto and put it to you. I've been talking for a while, Connie, about the need for a Mazakele campaign. Mazakele being a Zulu word for build it yourself. I say, let's say, on self. That's one of your taglines at Solidarity. I've got a feeling that those two things actually need to start speaking to each other if you're going to have a successful tax revolt type campaign, where you make the argument that actually we need to drive the point that paying as least as possible for the average South African benefits everybody, poor, rich, it's relevant. That same Goku who I spoke of at the beginning, who has to pay 15% in VAX, if you can find some way of reducing her tax burden, it's as equally beneficial as some dude who works in a Fortune 500 company and lives in Sandton. So that's the first imperative. Then the second one is actually inspiring a generation of South Africans who hold that ethos, that Mazakele ethos of we will do it ourselves, whether it's in Harry Smith and people fixing their own water infrastructure, or people saying, stuff it to hell with giving this money to the state. I'll try my best legally to keep as much of it so I can do something for myself or for the community, a food garden, our own water tank, whatever, something that makes people more resilient to state failure. And that's why I'm saying perhaps, to give you the final word, you guys need to apply your minds to this and tell me more about where the campaign is going to go from here.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Sihle. Our tagline is Ons Self, but we've added to that, which is Ons Self, maar nie alleen nie, which basically means Once you start realizing South Africa is not really this amorphous blob, it's a community of communities, and that means I think we've had we've decided we're not going to make decisions on behalf of any other community. I think we've had a bad history of people deciding on behalf of other people.
That's right.
We're going in the direction that says we're organizing our community, and we're hoping, and I'm glad you mentioned Mazakele, we're really hoping that people see this is the way. This is the way you get state-proof. This is the way you just plain build the future you want to see. That's what we're in the business of doing. It's saying if you're worried about security in your neighborhood, join a neighborhood watch, build that neighborhood watch, arm them, organize it, get it done. Don't wait for government to do it. They're not going to do it. It's quite simple. Regarding the problems, I think obviously we've been called white monopoly capital several times. I would gladly take everyone who's called me that on a tour of my apartment. They should see what's going on here. But on a more serious note, we're very seriously reaching out to traditional communities. We've got I don't know if you know Barend Ace. We've assisted the Barolong princesses. Well, there was a Barolong princess who was just plain deposed by an ANC councillor. And we facilitated that court case and said, but this is not the way. This is don't just throw away what people see as legitimate government, or not even government authority. South Africa cannot run from one central nationally planned place. It has never worked. It won't work. The National Party couldn't get it to work. The ANC is not at all going to get it to work. No one, the English even tried to do it that way, and that didn't work either. So we need to think differently. From our perspective, anybody who wants to join us, obviously the hand of cooperation is always open. I think we are worried about what will the impact be. However, what we've seen in COVID, Phila Sande, is that the best people, the guys who eventually stepped up and managed abject poverty, food need, all of those things, were community structures. We sat and waited for government, and nothing happened at any point. And then the churches got involved, we got involved, and we said, all right, if people need to eat and they need money and they need stuff like that, let's just do it. So we're going to do it ourselves. Hopefully the money that you would have paid in tax, which has a hefty burden on it and then gets redistributed, you can now distribute to organizations that actually do the job, do the work on ground level. So I think the starting point would be, we need to start thinking differently about South Africa as this thing that needs to be nationally run. I don't think it's going to work that way. We're a community of communities, and we need to start finding one another on that level. Obviously, we're going to decide for our community and try and get the best done. If other communities join us, that would be wonderful. We've got a lot of lessons to teach. We've learned the hard way. What works? How do you get funding done? The advantage is after the Saltec University got put down, we built it for, I think it's 300 million rand, which really was, it's 10 rand from each of our members for 10 years that we took and put it on the ground. After that, a lot of communities reached out to us and said, all right, we need a school. How do we do that? And we were in talks with several communities to say, all right, this is how you crowdfund something like this. We've got the expertise. We're more than willing to share it, but we're not going to do it for you. People need to do it for themselves. Otherwise, we're just back to wanting handouts from an institution, even if it's not government, and that's not the way forward.
Absolutely, fellas. We've genuinely run out of time. We couldn't even get to that last issue of the more than 1,300 adolescent girls and young women who have been found to be infected with HIV in this country every week. That's a massive issue, which perhaps. Holy shit, gunfire. Sorry, hang on. There's very, very close gunfire to me. I just need to close everything. Someone get on the floor. Yeah. Sorry, guys, I need to get my tools. There's very close gunfire to me. Fuck. He's along the road.
Yeah, it's on the road. Because he kind of up above the road and then right outside the gate.
Does it get locked?
Yeah.
Just to lock this up. Sorry, I just have a show going on. Let me just wrap up properly. Just stay away from the windows though, like I said.
Are you all right, Sihle?
No, I'm very fine. Welcome to the reality of living in Mlazi. It's just that it was very close gunfire, like almost outside our window here. So I'm gonna have to call this stream prematurely, guys, and say thank you very much to everybody who was part of the panel. Thank you, chaps, for watching the show. Let me let you guys go. Before I do, very quickly, how do the folks find you, Nzuzo?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on Facebook, Nzuzo Khati. You can also find me on Manpatria. It premieres every Monday. So please, yeah, catch me there. And yeah, man, hope everyone has a safe and a good week. Also you as well, Sihle. Yeah, man.
Okay, Koketso, how do the folks find you? And then Dumo after that?
Okay, so Koketso Resane, name, surname. Find me out on Twitter. I am not woke, so you have been warned. And also the Manpatria podcast every Monday, like Nzuzo mentioned, at 6 or 7 p.m.
Awesome,
Right.
awesome. Dumo.
All right. As for me, I reactivated my Twitter, so you can find me at Denga. And then also, you can also find me on the Manpatria podcast as well. We're releasing episode 104 at 6 o'clock tomorrow, which will premiere on YouTube.
Awesome, awesome. Phila, and then Connie, how do the folks find you?
I unfortunately do not have a personal social media account. Fortunately or unfortunately, but you can find Novomentus ZA on Twitter. And you can also check out some of our content in the form of podcasts and articles on nmonline.co.za.
Excellent. Connie, how do the folks find you? How do we
Yes.
get involved in this tax revolt campaign?
Wonderful. Yes. I'm not very active on Twitter, but I would recommend that people please follow Solidarity on Facebook and Twitter. That's where we're mostly active. And then since I'm head of the Solidarity Research Institute, we do have a couple of interesting reports that we publish every now and then. So if you want some light reading in the evenings on what taxation is doing, that's fine.
Awesome, awesome, guys. Thank you so much to everybody. As I said, guys, Connie, I will get in touch with Solidarity. Let's see how we can work together on this one. It's critically important that we start defending the average South African, the faith, flag, family, and freedom type South African that I often talk about. Guys, thank you so much. And we let all of you guys go so that I can wrap up the show and say thank you for watching. Unfortunately, things have deteriorated a little bit out here, so I need to go just quickly see what's going on and get my tools on me. It is that kind of evening. Thank you for watching. Remember, if you want to support the work that I do, it's as easy as $50 a month, $2 a month. All of those details are in the descriptor of this video. If you like Liberty and Friends, feel free in the comment section, pop us some suggestions. Let us know how we can improve the show. Some of you said, hey, make it longer, but an almost Joe Rogan style long format show. If you're interested in that, let me know in the comments. I'll see you on Wednesday. It won't be a live show because it's called Nitre, a Jewish religious holiday, just the day before Yom Kippur. So I will not be online, but there will be a pre-recording, a debate on whether vaccine passports and vaccine mandates are an infringement on our liberties or not. Very interesting and explosive debate coming your way. Thank you so much for watching. And as a reminder to you, I am based in Durban now for the foreseeable future, based in my home township of Umlazi. So that's possibly why you're hearing gunshots now as part of my broadcast. And but yeah, with that being said, thank you for watching. We're fine here, my cousin and I. And yeah, we'll see you on Wednesday for the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Until then, remember, never trust a commie.